You're here with me, Nick, today, and I've got two very special guests with me for what I think is going to be a really interesting and insightful conversation. So I'm here today with John Singleton, the founder of LifeLine Church, and Ken Jarvis, a long-standing member of LifeLine Church and also a long-standing friend of John's. You've known John for how many years, Ken?
It's something over 40 years now.
Over 40 years.
Yes, we first met in about 1976, 1977.
Wow, okay, so I want to hear a little bit about that today. But so, I really just wanted to chat with you both today about how you both kind of came to follow Jesus, how you came to be a part of the same community and church, and what being a part of serving this community has looked like over the past 40 plus years. So I just thought, for those that don't know, if I could get a quick background of you both. So maybe John, where did you grow up? What did you do your professional life, and how you came to follow God?
Okay, so I was born and grew up in Hertfordshire. My parents were from the East End. They were evacuated there during the war. My father then was severely wounded in D-Day, and so we stayed there, grew up there, and my parents were Christians. They probably quite a large measure of legalism, but they were true believers, and they were true to the knowledge that they had. That did not really extend to me. So as I grew up and got to an age of having some freedom, I really left all of that. I'd never had an experience with God at that time. I'd had religious engagements, and by that time I was stockbroking. I left school at 16, got an opportunity to start at the bottom, and that's where I stayed for 18 years.
Wow. And so you talked about having religious experiences but never kind of starting in your own faith, as it were. What led to that?
What led to that was having really rebelled and gone my own way very much to savour the things of this world. God kind of at one stage just miraculously intervened and began to draw me to himself. It was an intriguing thing, because the guys that I was kind of hanging out with, we had a dispute, a disagreement. We were living very immoral lives, but we had a dispute over morality.
Wow.
It was typical. It was really hypocritical, really. But it was the beginnings of God finding a unique and different way to avoid religion, but bring me into a relationship. And of course, relationship with him is what he intends, rather than religious procedures.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. That was a really insightful answer. Ken, similarly for you, where are you from? What did you spend your professional life doing, and how did you come to faith?
Well, basically, I'm a year older than John. I was born in 1943. I grew up in South London, and really my background was sort of just Church of England, usual sort of thing, going along on a Sunday, getting a rather cold bottom in church, and that was it. I obviously left school at 18, or went to medical school, and qualified at the age of 23. Did house jobs, and also then went into pathology, and was appointed consultant at the North Middlesex in 1974.
Wow.
I was invited by Jenny Cody, who worked in the same department as me at the North Middlesex, to go to Loxley Ford's house group. and went along there and suddenly realised, rather than getting a somewhat cold bottom, it was really living out the reality of a Christian life.
Wow.
I sort of gave myself to Jesus at that particular time.
Wow. So when you talk about a house group, just to paint a bit of a picture, so Church of England, I think, is quite obviously traditional, kind of a set formula.
Yeah.
What was it about this house group that made you kind of see Jesus in a new way and think this is...
It was a group of people that were actually living out the Christian life, living out community, and with the same values as we have today of honesty, integrity, and obviously expressing gifts of the Spirit.
Wow. And so I'm assuming it was around this time that you met John. Do you remember the first meeting John and how it came about? And
it was about 2 years later in 1976 when a number of house groups from across North London, there was David Carruthers in Oakwood, there was a group from Sewardstone, a group from Walthamstow, and the Tottenham group that with Loxley Ford. We all met together as LifeLine North London Community Church at that particular time. And it was then that I met John.
Wow. Do you remember meeting, it's all right if you don't, but do you remember meeting Ken for the first time?
I don't remember meeting for the first time.
Okay. But do you remember the time that Ken's speaking about?
I remember the time zone, It was intriguing because at that time we were drawing these different, as Ken said, different house groups from around North East London together under North London Community Church. I think we had that name then.
Yes.
And as we drew them together to form quite a large church, we also had profile outside of this area. And so we were having monthly meetings with people coming from all sorts of places and directions, and things were growing very, very fast. And we had no organisation, but then it was realised that we definitely needed something like that. It was great fun and total chaos. And somehow, and I can't remember, Ken may be able to remember the detail, I was involved in kind of making things happen.
Okay.
Whether you call it administration, organisation or something like that.
Yeah.
And finance was one of those things. And somehow we came with this idea that we would sort out the money.
You and Ken?
Yeah. Well, the money had to be sorted out, and somehow it fell to us to do it.
So when you say sorting out the money, are you talking about how to spend the thousands and thousands that you were getting in, or are you talking about how to pay the costs that it takes to run kind of a church organisation?
Yeah, I'd say
private jets, that kind of thing.
Yeah, not so much of that. I would say day-to-day running costs. If you're going to rent a hall, and there are various costs and transport and things involved. So it's a very practical thing, really.
Okay.
And I can't exactly remember the detail of how we first got together, but I'll tell you something that's very interesting. From the moment we got together, we found, I don't say oneness of heart and spirit, and neither of us, I mean, I was stockbroking, but I was working on investment advice and that side of things. I wasn't really involved in accounts or things like that. And Ken was involved, well, I don't know whether it was gynecology or pathology at that stage.
Pathology at that particular time.
So we had to learn, and we found a friend from another church group that introduced us to a basic, what we call accrual system. So we learnt that, we practiced it, we installed that, and to this very day, all these years later, we run on the same basic principle.
Wow. Okay, I want to touch a little bit later on the kind of what you're talking about. But Ken, can you remember, just hearing what John's speaking about, do you remember sort of first connecting with John? And if you do, what did you think of John?
Well, I think that at that particular time we actually found we very similar type backgrounds almost. We both had been to grammar school, and in fact we both had done woodwork, and John recognised a stall that I'd made at school, and he said, I made one like that as well. So we had a very similar type background.
I would have had very little to say to you guys. Woodwork wasn't my thing, believe it or not.
Well, I don't think, judging by the stall which rocks at the moment, it was mine either. But at least sort of I'd been shown the rudiments of making a rather wobbly mortise and tenon joint.
They both survived, Ken.
They have, yes.
All these years. So.
But no, it's again like John. Obviously, running sort of a account is not exactly my forte. I'm very good at making £21.43, £21.34, and wondering why I can't reconcile it at the end of the day. So I was delighted after about 2 years that Mike Taverner came along. Mike Taverner was in the Hyams Park group and was a bank manager and was very happy to take on the accounts, and I was delighted to give it over to him as well.
Wow. So when you first met John, or just around the time that you were getting to know John, obviously I know he's right next to you, but feel no pressure to say, what did you think? Do you remember kind of what stood out to you, and as he was kind of becoming the leader of this kind of house church movement that you were part of?
With John, there is the honesty and integrity that you have, that sort of, if John says this is something, then John will, be following that through and be doing that. And obviously his care for people as well came through very clearly. But one of the things that really has struck me with John over the years is John's wisdom, God-given wisdom. Wow. That, he really sort of is very incisive at times within situations, and, very clear.
Wow. So it sounds like the first real kind of point of connection with you guys, as you're saying, was this overlooking the finances. But what's quite exciting about hearing you guys speak is obviously that wasn't just, it doesn't sound like it was just maybe a function that you met up to do each week. It sounds like that a friendship which still stands today has blossomed from there. So
that's exactly what I was just going to say. Because, we were performing a function, but very, very soon, very early on, we realised this is not just a function. And that's what we were absolutely believing in, and getting together and forming something completely different and new in terms of the type of church relationship. And Ken and I were, I suppose, living in that and being an example of that, rather than just people that came together to look after the money. And many things flowed out of that, out of the friendship, rather than the function with the money.
Exactly. Over the years, John's care has been expressed in many ways. I don't know that many people know in the church that in 40 odd years, well, actually it wasn't quite 40 years ago, nearly 40 years ago, I had a heart attack, and John and Loxley came and prayed for me when I was in hospital. That was sort of very, very early on. They came and did that. Basically, very shortly after that, I heard from God saying, I make everything new. And about 6 weeks later, as is usual, I had a coronary angiograms done, which, is X-rays, show how the coronary arteries are. And the cardiologist turned to me afterwards and he said, surprised anything has happened. Following years, there is some scarring there, but nobody's actually, no cardiologist is absolutely concerned about things. So again, sort of God's healing there. Later on,
sorry, just to pause you, John. Do you remember?
Oh yeah. I remember clearly. Yeah, it was quite a shock at the time, but of course that's what we did. Not as kind of a ministry function as much as a relational thing. We were building relationally, and the relationship, showing God's love one to another, exactly as the Word of God says, was what we were seeking to live out. So, yeah, it was absolutely key critical. And in addition to that, we used to meet. I used to go over to the North Mid subsequent to that, and we'd spend lunch times together, and I guess we had to handle some financial things then, but basically we just enjoyed being together. And that's what we've done over the years. All sorts of different things.
Well,
maybe we'll get on to that.
Yeah. So Ken, I think I interrupted you. Were you going to...
No, hang on.
That's fine. That's fine.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so I've kind of been doing my research, and I don't know the story, but I've been told to ask about apparently the first time you emptied John's pond. Apparently that is a story worth hearing. You're both chuckling.
Unbelievable.
I don't know who best to start. Maybe I'll ask Ken what you remember of this, and then John, maybe you can give your reflections. So yeah, was there something significant?
Yes, John, when I originally met him, was actually living in Civitar House in Dagenham. But very shortly after that, he moved to Kinfauns Road. But then, I think after about another 5 or 6 years, probably early 80s, he moved here.
86, I think it was.
Yes, 86, John moved here. The garden was rather overgrown, and the pond that looks very nice and very clear and got lovely lot of fish in it was absolutely overgrown. So one Saturday we had a group of us came along and thought, well, we'll clear the pond for John. So got the fish out, which the most of the fish were probably only about 6 or 7 inches long at that time, and got them into various baths and containers and things. But then you need to clear the weed out of the pond and the silt, which was there was quite a lot in it. So therefore, I went into the pond in my in my bathing trunks, basically. Which Dawn has a photograph of me.
John, what do you remember of that day?
Unbelievable. I mean, they're here, Ken leading, I don't know, 3 or 4 others, and we didn't realise the size of the pond because it was so overgrown.
Yeah.
The next thing you know is Ken in his bathing trunks in the pool, and I mean it was in effect it was about 3 or 4 feet deep. But a lot of sludge. I mean, just a horrendous job. But they just did not stop, and it was almost as though they were enjoying doing it.
There was a lot of silt at the bottom of that pond.
Well, what made you? Why, Ken?
Well, it was the only way to clear it out, basically.
I think you set that against the background. We were sharing life together.
Yes.
We were doing things together. We didn't decorate our own house. We didn't paint our own rooms. We did it all together. You know, one day we'd do this house, and another week we'd do somebody else's. I think it was that spirit of expressing love in serving one another with great joy. I think we can look back on those times as being very, very special, even if it was a bit crazy, some of the things we did.
Wow. Okay, that's amazing. Are there any other stories that come to mind? Okay, Ken and his speedos in your pond. That's quite a good one. Is there any other things that just over the years serving together or maybe serving each other that kind of stick out? Absolutely fine if not.
I think there were so many things, but maybe just to mention a few.
Yeah.
So yeah, when Ken had the heart attack, we were there with him. When his children were born, I remember going in and not to the birth, but when they were born. Many happy times doing things together. When I could in previous times, we would sometimes take 2 or 3 days away and walk and enjoy this rather nice little hotel that Ken discovered some years ago. We did a lot of those things, walking together, and maybe we'd do a day or something like that, and we would talk constantly and share life. I think also in the sad times, when Ken's wife Sue passed away, I think part of relationship is you're there in the good and the bad and the happy and the sad. I think it's a joining together, and Ken has served me. He's got this amazing heart to serve, and in so many different ways, both using some of his medical skills, his wisdom, and his practical ability. I'm not sure whether I'd have him swim in the pond anymore, though.
Wow. And Ken, just as John's just kind of reflecting, and I love your answer to my question when I'm like, why? And you kind of like, well, it needed to be done. And I think that speaks of your heart. But what is it that's made you want to just serve John in the way that you have?
I think really it's the sort of love and care for others, and also somewhat of the heart of Christ behind it as well. That they're very, Jesus very clearly saw needs, met those needs. I have the ability perhaps to do practical things, and therefore this is one way of serving.
Yeah, amazing. So just kind of to circle back, so when you guys were first getting to know each other, mainly through this the function of kind of overseeing the finances. Again, doing my research, I heard that for a time at least, you guys would actually use your own salaries kind of to keep things running. So you're both humble in nature. Neither of you mentioned that. Again, I mean, maybe an obvious question, but why? What would cause you to put your own money into this? How did you guys come to that decision?
Well, the background was that we were expanding so quickly, and costs therefore were exceeding income, and the cash flow therefore in the church was not sufficient at a given period of time. That changed, but over a given period of time. So what we did was we took it in turns each month to actually personally support the cash flow of the church as was necessary. 1 month Ken would, another month I would. So we were able to do that at that time. Ken was senior consultant, I was stockbroking and had moved up to quite a higher level in that, so we were able to do that. Why wouldn't we, And I think also, Ken can add anything to add to that, Ken, that little escapade?
Yeah, was that a difficult decision to come to?
No, very, very easy actually. We needed to keep the church going. The church needed cash. We had available cash to put into it. We knew that at some time within the future there would be the ability to actually get the cash back, which it happened, and that but at that particular time the income of the church did not meet the expenditure, but it actually, as time went on, we were able to take the cash out again.
I was hoping you didn't say that, Ken, and I could still claim that there was some owing, but
well, do you remember that account?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think Ken said, well, that was the need, so I did it. But that's not just restricted to that particular thing.
Yeah.
Ken sees the need and he does it. I mean, here he is, retired senior consultant, very accomplished. But if he saw weeds in the car park of LifeLine House, nobody asked him, nobody told him. You'd see him going around dealing with the weeds in the ground. I mean, to me, that demonstrates something of Ken's heart. God has given him a heart of love and a heart that expresses love in serving. And that's a very biblical way. And love is primarily expressed through serving. So, yeah, he's a real example in that.
And yeah, I mean, and Ken, I obviously know you personally as well, and you're obviously really good friends with my parents. So, I like I say, I've got the privilege of knowing you personally. But you could quite easily, over the years I've seen that you're not looking for attention for what you do. You know, you've just faithfully served in so many ways that probably the majority of people that have been able to benefit from your serving probably don't even know that that you would have you would have played such a key role. And in a world, you know, I've grown up in a world where, as I'm sure you guys have in your own ways, where if you do something good, you need people to know about it, you know, because you need your recognition. But there's obviously something that you've seen, and you've spoken to it a little bit already, but in Jesus, that I don't get the impression, and I've never seen that you need your recognition, you need your pat on the back. What is it about Jesus and just life that you've seen that means that actually you can serve, like John says, a retired senior consultant, a very well accomplished man who will jump in the pond if it needs, will clear out the weeds, will sort out the church van, or respond to a broken window at Castle Point. I could go on. What is it that you've seen that makes you do that?
I'm happy to serve, as you say, in any capacity. That if it's the weeds at Castle Point, you know, I'm very happy to actually deal with those weeds. If it's sort of a blocked drain, I'm quite happy to deal with that. Basically, if there is a need, I'm happy to go in and serve in that particular area.
Wow. Okay. So I kind of got a final question for both of you. So just having listened to you chat, which I've found really, really, really insightful and interesting. Given your own experiences, both of you, what you've seen of friendship, what you've seen of serving, of walking together over decades, what advice would you give to the next generation? What counsel would you pass on? What is it that you would want to say to a 15-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 35-year-old listening to this conversation and thinking, wow? John?
Yeah. I would say live what you believe. And if you believe it, really believe it, you will live it. Otherwise it's just a theory or a notion. I think the Bible teaches so clearly that there are practical outworkings of living in a life that's following God. And in fact it actually says, measure of how much you love God by how much you love one another. Loving one another is not just, I love you brother, see you next week. It's expressed in serving. And I think Ken has really demonstrated that. And I think that when God drew us together to develop a different, and in those days a very different expression of church, of community, of relationship, it was very much based on the doing, not just the teaching or the theory. Yeah. It was on the practice. And I would say truly discovering what God has given us has to be worked out in reality. It's done in action, not just in word.
Wow.
And to this day, I would say Ken definitely epitomises. And when people come, when I was no longer able to deal with the lawn, people come and say, "Oh, your lawn is so good." I say, "My lawn is so good it thinks it's died and gone to heaven." But they say, "How do you do it?" I say, "I have a secret. Ken has taken full control." And so it's just a living example, an ongoing example.
Wow.
And we enjoy being together and having a chat. Ken,
Yeah, exactly.
Can't do the walking together.
No, but we can have a chat.
We can have time together. Yeah.
Amazing. Ken?
Yes, I would totally agree with what John has said. I would say to any young person, particularly, is follow what Jesus has said for you, and your steps will be determined. If I look back now on my own life, I originally, when I was in the sixth form, wanted to go and do horticulture. I'd even sent off the prospectuses from Reading University at that time, King's College London, Y College in Kent. And then sort of suddenly thought, well, perhaps I'd like to do medicine instead. Well, so that was a different direction. I then applied to various medical schools. St George's actually accepted me. Now, this was the smallest medical school in London. We had only 2 lots of entries, one in April, one in October, which was about 25 students, one in April, which was again 25 students. So there were only 50 students a year there, and it was really very good, almost apprenticeship type teaching. And it was a very enjoyable time at medical school. When I qualified, I actually qualified with a distinction in the degree. There were only about 6 of us who got distinctions out in the University of London out of about 300 and something. And my distinction was in obstetrics and gynecology. It was then determined that you then sort of basically, depending on how well you'd done, what sort of jobs you did. Well, I got the plum surgical job, the professorial surgical unit, as houseman on the professorial surgical unit, followed by a good house physician job to a consultant chest physician who worked between St George's and the Royal Brompton Hospital. I then sort of went on to do a year in obstetrics and gynecology, thinking I'd be doing, as per having got a distinction in that, be doing obstetrics and gynecology. Fine, I enjoyed that year, but then needed to do a fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons. So I thought, well, I'll do pathology for a year, at which time I can sit down and do some reading and take the Fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons exams. I so enjoyed doing pathology. There we are, another change to that, doing pathology. And basically, I then it was about 5 years postgraduate working in pathology before you could become a consultant, and applied to Winchester for a job there. I didn't get it. Canterbury, a good friend of mine, got that particular job, and then the North Middlesex in Edmonton, which then, because I was there, I actually got introduced to Loxley's house group.
Wow. So just like, even though you couldn't, you was knocking on certain doors, they weren't open, but you were seeing that actually God all the way.
Yeah, I can see God in my life. I would not have met Sue if in the early days of the church we were not having speakers coming in who were international speakers: Arthur Wallace, Bryn Jones, Barney Coombs. She was in a church in South London, Earlsfield Baptist Church. We had a common sort of friend, but because we were having these speakers probably once a month, wasn't it, John? She came over from Earlsfield Baptist Church. Well, what chance I'd have meeting her there if we hadn't had those particular meetings. There was an opportunity that we might well have met. She was a nurse in Southampton. Now, I did a month in obstetrics and gynecology in Southampton when I was a student. But as Sue said, these terrible medical students, I'd never have gone out with one then.
Wow. So just how you've seen God kind of guiding your steps, I think that's such an amazing story for us to take heed from. John, Ken, thank you so much for your time. I've really, really appreciated that.